Bigfoot, Bigfoot, roaming through the land. Bigfoot, Bigfoot, a hairy ape-like man.
Well, hello, my friends and fellow Bigfoot enthusiasts. Welcome to another episode of Bigfoot Today. I'm your host, Stephen Major, and with me once again is my co-host, Mitch the Man Johnson. How you doing, Mitch?
Like I've been ridden hard and put away wet. As
Wonderful.
a tax accountant, that's what you're supposed to feel like this time of year.
Well, we're glad you made it to the show today. And I got to tell you, folks, we've got a very exciting and interesting show coming up for you. We have Mr. Ken Gerhard in the studio with us today, and I'm sure he's a man who needs no introduction. You probably know who he is, but we're looking for a great interview. And now we're going to take a short commercial break, and we'll be right back.
This show is sponsored by Extreme Expeditions Northwest LLC, your gateway to adventure, specializing in guided Bigfoot expeditions to Alaska and throughout the Pacific Northwest and Canada.
Well, hello, my friends. Welcome back. And now it's time for What's New in Bigfoot. Well, Mitch, what's new in Bigfoot? What do you know?
Oh, well, what do I know? Not much. But what's new is, well, to kind of segue from the last show, haven't heard back from Captain Kirk yet, but we haven't actually officially invited William Shatner, so we're gonna send that out. And then I wore the hat today because Jonathan Hillstrand, Captain Jonathan from the Deadliest Catch, the Time Bandit, got to meet him a few years ago. He's just the most real person. What you see on TV, unlike a lot of reality TV, that is really who he is. He's a great person, and hopefully he can make it over to Medellin Falls also.
Is he into Bigfoot?
I'm sure he is. I'm going to reach out to him and see. You'd have to know him. Oh, yeah. Yeah, he would be totally into Bigfoot.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Because remember, the show's all about Bigfoot.
No, it's about life. It's about...
Bigfoot is life.
It is, exactly. I'm sure he is. He just... Yeah. There's no way he's not. So he'd be an extra source of energy.
Well, that'd be interesting. I've actually never seen an episode of the show, but I watched the previews and stuff too, and it looks pretty good. Yeah.
Well, I was always interested in the show because I had an opportunity as a college student to go on a crab fishing boat. My dad, I did longshoring because of my dad's connections. He also one time said, "Well, if you want, I could get you on a fishing boat in Alaska." Oh, really? Yeah, I make good money. Of course, they lose a couple boats each year. Yeah. And I was like, Nallies or possibly die. Okay, I'll stick here. So anyway, I've always been fascinated because of that. So anyway, now the next thing is, and I don't have to tell people this, that people that are smart enough to watch our show don't need to know this, but the point is reality TV is not real. And
what?
I know. Watch out, right?
Oh my gosh.
It's staged, it's acting, it's entertainment, whatever, God, think for a second. But there's this mouth breather on YouTube that you showed me the other day, and he's got this.
Wait a minute!
And he's got this paper mache Sasquatch head, and the dude, and that's not the one you showed me. The one you showed me the other day, he was somewhere else, and it's the most ludicrous thing. And I saw in it also that he is a dog trainer, and and I've trained dogs and love it. I wouldn't even let this guy, let alone not walk my dogs. I wouldn't let him train my dogs. What a loon! He's totally unhinged. He's an idiot. He goes off on Bobo from Finding Bigfoot.
Yes, and I saw that.
And it's like, oh my gosh! Now I've never met Bobo, so I'm going to save my judgment until I meet him. I'm not going to base my opinion of Bobo on what I see on TV. Finding Bigfoot, I've watched a number of the episodes. I mean, it's whatever. It is what it is. But then he goes off on, they don't follow science. They don't follow science. I mean, I guess that's the big word these days. And then he goes off on Bobo, and get this. Then he's like, and then Bobo says, can you believe this? He says that Sasquatch likes pancakes and bacon. I'm like, how do you know that's not true? If you were frying up some bacon, you don't think Bigfoot's out there watching and going, boy, that smells good. And you have first-hand experience. I believe it was in Stevens County. You guys were all camped there, and then after you all left, somebody had an opportunity or a reason to go back, and there was definitely impressions and stuff that Bigfoot had come around and said, hey, did they leave anything good? So he just goes off on Bigfoot, which on Bobo, I should say, on the pancakes and bacon. And so, of course, that leads me.
Sounds good.
I know. And everything. That shows that he's a fraud. He's never been outside of his backyard. Because anybody who has gone camping knows how good food tastes when you're camping. And if you can get some pancakes and bacon in the morning. Oh my gosh, that's eating. That's eating. That's good eating.
Well, here's what I say about Bigfoot and bacon. Okay. Now I've read. It's fascinating me. I read everything I can get my hands on book-wise about Bigfoot encounters and what Bigfoot's like. Any information I can get. And it seems like the East Texas Bigfoot is a big pork fan. Because a lot of the stuff that I come across, he's always stealing people's hogs.
Yeah.
So there could be some connection.
Well, I've never really been there. I mean, they do have wild hogs, right? And
well, they had Hogzilla.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying in real life, people go hunting
Right.
these hogs, so it would make sense.
But I mean, seriously, I read a couple of books and about it's like in the Big Thicket or something they call it down there in East Texas, and half of the sightings are some farmer who sees a Sasquatch running away with a hog under each arm. So there must be some connection.
There's probably some connection. This guy, though, then he got me thinking about pancakes and bacon, and then of course everything in my mind these days leads to Medellin Falls and the event coming up in June. And there was some talk about having some sort of a charity breakfast available, and I'm going to have to check with the organizers up there. Now, I'm here to say for certain, come to Medellin Falls for Saturday and Sunday morning. There will be pancakes and bacon available. Most likely, it'll be free. And I can guarantee you, if I have to do it myself, I'll do it myself, no problems. And so we are going to have that. And and I saw on your Facebook post, somebody said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Stephen. I'm glad you sold out, but I can't make it." And then, of course, you clarified, it's not sold out. It will never be sold out. Just the inside event, as far as the with the speakers. But, it's not like those people are just getting on a helicopter and leaving Medellin Falls. They're going to be hanging around. Probably having bacon and pancakes.
There's so much we can't stress that enough. There's so much more going on.
There's a lot going on. They've got a lot of cool stuff going on. So you can have, you can sit down and have some pancakes with Bob Gimlin. When else do you get a chance with that?
Yeah.
That's worth the travel right there.
Man, I mean, no, seriously. But I got to talk about this guy.
I know you do. I don't like to reward bad behavior, but you're insisting. You go right ahead.
Because I find it, okay, regardless of what he says, he's very negative, but he definitely is a personality. And in that last video, the one I sent to you, where he's criticizing Bobo unfairly and all of that. But outside of that, it was some pretty funny stuff. But you got to look at the size of this head. He's got, he has all these body parts, and he talks about how they dissected them and because they were so large and whatnot. But he comes up with some incredible stuff, and I find him extremely humorous. He tries to be overly serious, but he comes off humorous. But I have to admit, after seeing his last video, I did reach out to him, and because I would love to interview him. I'd love to get him on the show and just, talk with him a little bit, because he is an interesting guy. Whether you believe in anything he has to say or not, I just found him extremely entertaining, and I thought that he would be somebody great to have on the show.
I will say yes.
Maybe show up with his Bigfoot head at the Medellin Falls Bigfoot Festival.
He's interesting.
Yeah.
We'll say that. And look at the head. I wish you had a picture of the one that we just posted on YouTube. This is from 2017. The one he's currently posting is a much newer, better looking head.
I couldn't find it.
The hair is groomed but his dad kept it in the freezer since 1950.
Yeah, he kept it in the freezer, and I thought, you must have one big freezer and to hang on to it since 1953.
I don't know. It's looking pretty good for something that's been in the freezer like that without really being sealed. But somewhere in the notes, he does say that the DNA samples have been sent to the lab. Yeah. So it's kind of like the checks in the mail.
Well, anyways,
we'll believe it.
Enough on him.
Oh, yes. No, more than enough.
Yeah. So anything else new?
No, you got your film coming out. We've got Hulu coming out with another Sasquatch TV series. Then we've got some other people going up to northeastern Washington to film, and
it's just exploding in this area.
I know.
What's with all the interest in this area in Sasquatch all of a sudden?
Well, they finally figured out that Sasquatch technically comes from here. Sasquatch is the Native American name, and there's different names all over the country. But we have a lot of sightings up here. Yeah. It's beautiful country.
Yeah, I just read that.
And basically, the people are fleeing Seattle and California like rats fleeing a ship because of all the stuff that's been going on. So, hey, we'll go up to Washington.
Yeah, well, you know what? This area is getting flooded. The only thing I've got new to talk about today, once again, I want to say the release of our first episode of Bigfoot Encounters in the Pacific Northwest should be available on Vimeo, I think today or tomorrow. And then also follow up with that's going to be on Amazon. Excited to get that released.
Good.
Been a long haul in that one. And we talked about the Medellin Falls Bigfoot Festival. Come. It's going to be a great time. There's going to be a lot of people there that aren't speaking, that would like to speak, that are good people, I think, good people.
Oh, yeah,
in
absolutely.
the Bigfoot community that you would recognize that speak at a lot of conferences.
Oh, yeah.
And I love the fact that a number of them are going to come anyways.
Yes.
Even though they can't get in there. But there'll be ample time. Most of them we're going to set them up with a vendor table as well, and they'll be there. So that's good.
No, it's going to be very good.
Other than that, I think that kind of wraps up what's new in Bigfoot today.
Yep.
So we're going to go to a short commercial break, and we'll be right back with Mr. Ken Gerhard.
This show is sponsored by the Private Money Store Incorporated. They specialize in private real estate lending for commercial or business purposes in Washington State.
Well, welcome back, my friends, and please help me welcome Mr. Ken Gerhard. Brother, thanks for being on the show, my man. Welcome.
Thank you. Good day to you both. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Very
Dude,
cool.
no, thank you, man. Well, good. How's your stay in Spokane been so far?
Oh, I love Spokane. Beautiful city. I've never really spent a lot of time here before. I've kind of passed through, but it's got a lot of personality.
Yeah.
Kind of an interesting city, beautiful scenery, and you get the best of both worlds. You get the outdoors and the mountains, lots of wildlife, and then you get a little bit of the colorful culture, and it seems like people here have probably a lot of interesting things to talk about. So.
Oh, man, they do. And we've got the big red wagon at Riverfront Park.
Yes, I noticed that right away.
Yeah, well, great.
Biggest wagon I've seen. No,
well, you can't leave town without a photo in front of it, man, I'm telling you.
Okay.
It's iconic. But anyways, well, I always like to start out with a guest, and so you can explain to the folks and those that don't know you, maybe haven't read the book, how did you get into Bigfoot?
Wow. Well, like a lot of young boys, about 8 or 9 years old, I was already interested in creatures. I had a lot of exotic pets when I was growing up. My first pet was a little alligator, a caiman, and I had snakes. An
alligator?
Snakes and salamanders. So I liked collecting critters and spending time in the outdoors. And I also loved monster movies. So I kind of grew up on Godzilla movies and a lot of those old monster flicks. And so when I first heard about Bigfoot, I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I remember I was watching cartoons one Saturday morning, probably Scooby-Doo, I don't know. But on the commercial break, they did a little news segment on Bigfoot. I'd never heard of it before, and they showed a clip from the famous Patterson-Gimlin film, and they had some guys kind of holding the plaster cast of the footprints, and my mind was blown, Stephen. I mean, the possibility that there could be this giant hair-covered monster. Man-like monster in the woods of North America. So something just clicked, and so it became my obsession at a young age. And I certainly never dreamed on, about pursuing it in any type of career or anything like that. I've just, lived a kind of an interesting life, traveled a lot, and was always interested in these legends and myths of strange creatures. So,
well, man, see, that's interesting because. I'm a little older than you, but I kind of saw the Patterson and Gimlin film, I think when I was like 9 or 10 or something around the same age. And all it did was scare the crap out of me, and I had no interest in going out in the woods after that for a while. It didn't really stick with me, but you're another one where you kind of put the hook in you at a young age. And then how long after that was it that you saw the legend of Boggy Creek?
Well, it was about the same time. And, I guess I should have qualified that because, I saw the Patterson-Gimlin film, and around that same time period, the legend of Boggy Creek was showing at local movie theaters. And, of course, there was a show on that I loved called In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy that covered Bigfoot and a lot of subjects. And also The $6 Million Man was a big hit when I was a kid, and they had that famous Bigfoot episode. But another seminal event in my life was around that same time period in 1976. I was living in Minnesota at the time, and as a kid, I visited the Minnesota State Fair, and I saw this thing called the Minnesota Iceman.
Oh!
And so there was this exhibit at the State Fair, and this guy was, calling out, it could be Bigfoot, it could be the missing link, who knows? And he was the barker, and I kind of went up this stairwell, and I was kind of anticipating. I didn't know what I was going to see, but I walked into this modified truck trailer, and there was this frozen was like a sarcophagus with like ice, and there was this frozen, hairy, man-like, dead, obviously, hairy, man-like thing in the ice, and that really blew my mind too. I didn't know if it was real or not, but so all that kind of stuff happened at the same time back in the 70s.
Well,
so.
Dude, whatever happened with this Minnesota Iceman? Wait, what?
Yeah, it's it's a pretty iconic story in the Bigfoot field, right?
Yeah.
So this guy Frank Hansen back in the late 1960s was touring around the country with this thing. Somebody saw it. This guy named Terry Cullen, who was a veterinary student, thought it might be real, and this guy might have a real dead Bigfoot frozen in this block of ice. So he tried to get some legitimate scientists from the University of Minnesota to come look at it. And nobody was really interested. Actually, one anthropologist supposedly looked at it, didn't show much interest. But he finally reached out to a couple of guys, Bernard Heuvelmans and Ivan Sanderson, who were like the pioneers of the field of cryptozoology. And they were convinced enough to go visit this thing on this guy's ranch in Minnesota, this guy Frank Hansen that owned this thing. And they went and he let them for 3 days kind of go into the truck and study. You know, it was in the ice. I mean, he wouldn't melt the ice. And he didn't have any flesh samples.
Oh, so they did melt.
No, so they had to kind of, they took pictures and measurements, but they spent a lot of time looking at this thing. And keep in mind, both of these guys are zoologists, and they were skeptical at first.
Yeah.
They thought it might be a fake or of some kind, but they came away convinced that it was real.
Really?
Yeah, so they were convinced that this thing, one of the things they said, they could smell its rotting flesh kind of coming up through the ice. So
What was it? I don't know, 5-10 years ago, wasn't it Tom Biscardi and got involved with some guy out of Texas that had a frozen?
Well, Rick Dyer was the guy out of Georgia that kind of followed that blueprint of the frozen Bigfoot in the cooler. And
wasn't that a big scandal thing there?
It was revealed as a hoax back in 2009. So I mean, there's a few of those, more than a few of those we could talk about. But the cool thing about the Minnesota Iceman is, and it's a long story. I write about it in my book, so it's a pretty involved thing. Yeah. But the Minnesota Iceman was announced as a real creature on the Johnny Carson show, for example, back in 1968, 69. And then the law enforcement got involved, and the Smithsonian Institute, and all these people were looking at it.
Wow, I got to look this up.
So the guy that owned it, he kind of disappeared for a few months, and then he resurfaced and claimed that he had hidden the original Iceman, which was real, and now he had a latex version that he was going to tour around and show. And so a lot of people think, it's the whole thing's a hoax. It just sounds too fishy. But a few years ago, a friend of mine named Steve Busty, who owns a museum in Austin, Texas, bought the Minnesota Iceman exhibit, which had just kind of turned up on eBay. And so he has it now in Austin. So.
And that's the latex one?
It is latex.
Okay, I got to say it.
No doubt.
The latex version, you bought it. Okay, let's go look at a latex.
Yeah,
anyways.
It's pretty obviously latex. But, the question is, was there ever an actual, real, biologically viable Iceman? And there's two schools of thought. Some people think there's no way. The whole thing was latex all along, and people just got fooled. And then other people think there was a kind of a switcheroo done, and there's a conspiracy where someone's tried to conceal the original specimens. So it's...
Man, I'm going to have to do some homework on that, because I didn't know about that and everything that went along with that.
One last thing I'd like to close on, because I personally have gotten a chance to examine the latex version pretty much out of the ice on a couple of occasions at length. And based on measurements and physical descriptions, there are a number of differences between that one and the one that was originally described by the two zoologists, Heuvelmans and Sanderson. Some of the measurements don't line up, some of the features don't line up. So to me, at least, you could make an argument that there might have been two different versions at some point.
Yeah.
So then the question comes, Stephen, was it two different latex versions? Or was one latex and one was flesh and blood? Who knows?
I will forget if I don't jump right into it. That's interesting. We're really here to talk about your new book, The Essential Guide to the Loch Ness Monster and Other Aquatic Cryptids. But dude, I got to tell you, last night you gave me both books, which was a bad thing to do, because I started getting into this one, and then I had to get into The Essential Guide to Bigfoot. And I'll tell you what, this thing, I'm sorry, it captivated most of my time. But there was something very interesting in the chapter here where we were talking about tracks, and I'd never heard this before. And you know how people talk about the dermal ridges?
Right.
You know, they say, oh, this got to be a real Bigfoot track because it's got dermal ridges. And in your tracking portion here, you talked about you had consulted with, I think it was Cliff Brackham and that, and there was something about the dermal ridges that what people think are dermal ridges could quite possibly be, how was it? The settling, could you explain it? The settling of the plaster or something?
Artifacts, because, and you know, there was a really interesting presentation done by a guy named Matt Crowley back at the Sasquatch. There was a Sasquatch symposium back in 2005, and he did this talk. And basically what he figured out was, and Cliff Barrickman kind of backs this up, that you know, when you're casting a track, and the plaster or whatever substrate you're using is kind of in a pasty form, and then you pour it into the footprint or the track, as it's hardening, it's possible for the water to basically create striations or artifacts in the surface of the cast, which could look theoretically very much like dermal ridges or fingerprints.
Yeah.
They're just kind of little lines that show up.
Right.
So, you know, I think we have to look critically at claims of dermal ridges and consider that sometimes things might show up in some of those casts that, you know, are a little bit deceptive.
Well, are there some track castings out there that were confirmed by experts that those are in fact dermal ridges? That would be my question.
Jimmy Chilcutt.
Jimmy.
If you haven't heard of Jimmy Chilcutt, he was actually a law enforcement forensic fingerprint expert from Conroe, Texas, my home state. And Jimmy was sitting at home one night watching a TV show, and he saw this Bigfoot special, and he started talking about dermal ridges, dermatoglyphics. And he was like, wow, that's my specialty. And in fact, Jimmy Chilcutt had, this is an interesting fact, Jimmy Chilcutt had spent some time traveling around to different zoos and animal collections and fingerprinting lots of large primates like apes and gorillas, just so he could educate himself on the differences in terms of the features. And so he considered himself, well, I'm uniquely qualified to look at these alleged Bigfoot dermal ridges because I know what different primates have in terms of their dermal ridges. And so he traveled up to Washington State and visited with Dr. Grover Krantz, Meldrum, and some of those other guys, and looked at some of them. And he was skeptical at first, but he started looking at some of these alleged dermal ridges, and he thought, these are real. You know, that to his experience, he said that they're not exactly like a human or a gorilla. They have kind of a unique signature. Yeah. But at least he came away convinced that they could not have been faked on some of the tracks, not saying all of the alleged tracks. So Chilcutt is kind of, he's been laying low in recent years, but for a while there in the early to mid 2000s, he was kind of speaking at different Bigfoot conferences and stuff and presenting that argument that, you know, this is, in his mind at least, convincing evidence that Bigfoot must exist because of these authentic skin ridges in the cast.
That really jumped out at me because we have we've been given custody of a very interesting set of tracks that were casted by a wonderful woman who you'll be meeting up at the Medellin Falls Bigfoot Festival back in the 90s up there in Pend Oreille County. Yeah. And the large, she has two sets of tracks, but the large tracks, when you look at the bottom of it, it's like, it looks like, I was like, look at the dermal ridges on this thing, you know, and I don't know jack, but I know what dermal ridges are. But anyways, and we looked at it under, you know, all kinds of different lighting and all that, but that's what it looks like. You go, it looks like skin. But now I'm going, maybe that isn't, I don't know. But anyways, it kind of raises that question that I'd love to get somebody, you know, to look at them. Dr. Robert Alley examined the tracks and felt that, you know, explains why he thought they were authentic and all that. But anyways, that's an interesting thing. So from now on, when people start screaming about dermal ridges, there's going to be that question in my mind. Really, is that what we have, or do we have the...
Well, there's one other variable too, Steve, that I forgot to mention. And again, this is Cliff Barrickman, who spends a lot of time looking at cast evidence. He thinks that a lot of the alleged dermal ridges that people find are actually human fingerprints from people polluting what he calls polluting the evidence by putting their fingers and hands into the track before they cast it. You know, if you can imagine theoretically someone like, oh, look at this Bigfoot track, and they keep touching it and putting their fingers in it.
I've seen somebody do that.
So, I mean, you have to consider that as a possibility too. But, if you look at, Chilcutt's findings, I mean, at least to me, like I said, this is a fingerprint, expert whose testimony has sent people to, prison and so forth. And so he was convinced that at least some of them seemed genuine. So
so I mean, oh, dude, I just, there's so much in this book, and that was one of the things that I wanted to hit on. But I wanted to read something because this was very profound, and it was in your introduction in the book. With regard to the subject of Bigfoot and other enigmatic creatures, misinformation, misconceptions, and all-out falsehoods rule the day. It's becoming more and more difficult to determine what claims, if any, have merit, and the findings are being forgotten. Dude, that was heavy, because that's the truth. I was having a discussion with somebody the other day. There is so much information that's put out right now. I mean, it's everywhere. You got 50 billion, podcasts, whatever, people doing stuff. And it's really, really difficult to, I mean, how do you know what is that thing? What's real, what's legitimate, what's not? And that it can drive a guy crazy.
But it's kind of the double-edged sword of the social media age that we live in. There's more information at your fingertips than you'd ever dreamt that you'd have. But it doesn't necessarily mean that all that information is relevant or accurate. And so it is very difficult, I think, particularly for people that haven't been in the Bigfoot field for a long time. Maybe they got into it, when Finding Bigfoot came on TV or whatever. And so they, jump on YouTube videos and different things. And so it's hard for some of those people to kind of figure out exactly what, information to trust. But, I've been in the field for decades, and I've always kind of tried to build a consensus, because it's a lot of speculation, Stephen, as you know. I mean, what I always tell people is I don't consider myself an expert. I don't think there is such a thing as an expert in Bigfoot. So we're all really good speculators. Those of us that, So there are different levels of speculation, and it's all based on how much good information that you've kind of accumulated and how objectively you can look at that information. And I've had the benefit, I feel very blessed, to work with most of the leading Bigfoot investigators in North America that have been doing it for years and years. And although we don't agree on a lot of things, there are certain things that most of us agree on, and those are the things that I try to focus on.
I hear you there. One thing, I'm new to this game. I really am, and we kind of talked about it over lunch. It didn't really occur to me until 2014 that, hey, maybe this would be something, investigating Bigfoot sightings and the phenomena, maybe something I want to get into, And then, went to Vancouver Island 2014 and investigated that one thing. But what I found is when I started doing research back at that time, I started reading all the books I could get. I started seeing who was out there, who's doing what. And, I like reading the stuff that's older, the older reports, that are back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Those are the ones that intrigue me the most, because they seem to be the most believable. There seem to be a lot of consistencies in that. But I noticed as time there was a certain amount of information that seemed to be static up until 1970 or 1972, and then you had the Patterson-Gimlin film gets out, and then you have the Boggy Creek, and then you have that interest of Bigfoot in the 70s. And then there were a few new things that came out, and then it was kind of static again. And then with the advent of the commercialization of Bigfoot, with the shows and blah, 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 and now it's all popular stuff. What I've noticed is that it seemed that all of a sudden people started, they didn't have anything else to say about Bigfoot. They didn't discover anything new, so they started to manufacture things. And maybe I'm wrong on this, but I didn't find anything about tree structures at all. I mean, I didn't find anything about tree structures being mentioned anywhere up until about, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago or so. And then all of a sudden, we got tree structures. Now, Bigfoot's doing all these tree structures and creating all these things, and then people are, so-called experts are saying, this means this, and they tie it into how all First Nations and Native people would leave markers, and you lead into a book, but you make it make sense. Like when you're some weird tree structure stuff you found, but when you kind of followed them, it was in your book there, they led to a watering hole that was not discovered. And that could make it be a little more sense to me, but I'm kind of skeptical about it. Then you have people who are, all of a sudden Bigfoot becomes this paranormal, quantum physics thing that's bumping in and out of portal. You know what I mean? And there's all these stuff, and it's just like, it's really hard for me to accept any of that stuff. And I don't think that I want to pursue it. But that's my thought, that all of a sudden people started manufacturing things, which contributed to the misinformation. Now, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
No, I think that's a reasonable take, Stephen, actually. To your first point, I'm with you in terms of those older sightings, and particularly people that really kind of stuck their neck out more. And as an example, John Green, the great chronicler of Bigfoot accounts, early on when he got into Sasquatch investigations in British Columbia, one of the first things he did is he had eyewitnesses sign sworn affidavits in front of judges or magistrates, which is a legally binding thing, where you're basically saying, I saw Sasquatch, and you could literally go to jail if you
found out your fault
fabricating that. So he wanted to add that extra level of credibility. He found that it didn't really make a big difference in the long run, so he kind of gave up on that methodology. Another thing is, consider back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, how many people that had Bigfoot sightings would actually contact the police and file a report, and ultimately that report would get into the newspapers and their name is published in the newspapers as a Bigfoot witness. That's really kind of sticking your neck out there, right, Stephen?
Yeah.
As opposed to these days where people just go onto a random website, a Bigfoot group. Oh yeah, I've seen Bigfoot or whatever, and they're not, but don't tell anyone or, So
don't tell anyone, but here's my address.
Yeah, and not to question those experiences, because some of those might be accurate, but that's compelling to me when someone says, you know what, I saw Bigfoot and I'm freaked out, so I'm calling the sheriff and I'm going to report this thing. So a lot of those older accounts are kind of, to me, interesting for that reason. And you're right. And, in terms of this big explosion in social media and the internet, now you have a lot of kind of quote unquote storytellers out there, and people that are wanting to, maybe put their own spin on Bigfoot or have different kind of objectives in terms of maybe, a website or a YouTube channel.
Or a TV series.
Or a TV show.
Everybody wants a TV show.
So it does become very problematic, to kind of figure out who's doing what. So.
Well, that leads me into another question. In your opinion, what do you think? And I mean, you cover so much in your book, and I don't want to just keep reading out of your book. I want people to buy your book. But what do you think Bigfoot is?
Well, I always pre-qualify this question by telling people, again, I'm not an expert, but I've been investigating Bigfoot for 45 years.
45 years.
Since I consider myself, I wasn't a normal 8 or 9 year old, but as an 8 or 9 year old, I was traveling around the world and doing a lot of really adventurous things. But, looking at all the evidence, my own experience investigating, doing field research all over the continent, from Alaska to Florida to Texas to Ohio to Central America, working with most of the leading Bigfoot investigators in the world. I've become 90% convinced that Bigfoot exists. And that's a scientific way to look at it, I think, because I've never seen one with my own eyes. That would push me to 100%, Stephen. Yeah. So you always have to be, I think, in science, any scientific pursuit, you always have to maintain a little bit of objectivity. But I guess I'm considered what's known as an aper, if people haven't heard that term. But
I haven't.
An aper is basically someone that looks at Bigfoot as a relict hominid. Yeah. So basically some type of great ape that walks upright on its hind legs. We don't know where it fits into the paradigm of human evolution, but it's obviously big and robust. It's covered in hair. It has a mosaic of human and ape-like features. So to me, if you're convinced that Bigfoot exists, you have to explain A, what it is and how does it fit. What is the most probable thing that it fits into in a category, and that is some type of ancient, great ape or pre-human. And then secondly, you have to explain, the ecology behind it. What does it eat? How many are there? Where do they live? If it's a real thing. And then the third thing is you kind of have to understand or explain, why haven't we found it? Which is the $1 million question. Why doesn't anybody have definitive proof that they exist? But anyways, so yeah, I try to look at these things from a scientific point of view. That's what apers do. I don't advocate any theories about other dimensions and paranormal origins with regard to Bigfoot. That doesn't mean that it couldn't exist elsewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think Bigfoot is a very elusive, very rare, possibly endangered great ape that lives in North America and other parts of the world, and that there are reasons that we haven't been able to find them yet.
Yeah, yeah. That's pretty much where I'm at on this. You know, like I said, I'm a newbie in all this, but I take what information I can get, and I try to use that to better objectively analyze any evidence that I may find in the field.
Yeah.
But for me, I use the term researcher loosely because I don't know what else to call myself. But I'm not really a researcher. I go out and I investigate and whatnot, and I basically chase Bigfoot. I mean, that's what I'm doing out there. For me, and so, but I try to surround myself on my expeditions with the best people that I can get, that where I am weak, they are strong, you know, that will actually not walk by and fail to collect evidence like we've done in the past, or fail to cast a track or something because I'm saying, no, let's get them, you know, I mean, when we're on the trail of them. So, yeah, we made a lot of mistakes, but we're getting better at it. And I'm getting better with the team and everybody that we use. But anyways, that's great. Now the other, you've been to so many places. I mean, you've traveled, like I said, since Europe, South America. But what's been your favorite expedition, or the one that was most meaningful to you, where you've gone?
Oh gosh, that's tough. Well, you know, I mentioned Central America.
Yeah.
About 20 years ago, I staged 2 expeditions down to a country called Belize, which is just south of Mexico. And there are traditions of 2 different types of unknown hominids from Belize. One is very similar to Sasquatch. It's known as the Sisamito. Sisamito or Sisamite. And the Quechua Maya people that have been there for thousands of years say that it's basically like a man-like gorilla that lives up in the mountains. And the physical descriptions sound just like a Bigfoot type of thing. And then you also have a pygmy-sized version, a dwarf version that people call the duende, which is basically Spanish for goblin. And you know, Ivan Sanderson first wrote about the duende way back in the 1960s, and he said it was a little 3 to 5 foot tall, hairy man-like creature, basically a Bigfoot, but you know, half the size, less than half the size. So when I was mounting my first expedition down there in 2004, we actually discovered some small human-shaped footprints that were, you know, maybe 6 inches, 7 inches long in an area of the Maya Mountains where there had been these stories of the duende years. So, I mean, that was kind of exciting because, you know, at least initially there was a bit of a stir in the Bigfoot field that, you know, hey, this new, you know, Bigfoot researcher, or at least I was kind of new in the Bigfoot scene to some extent at that time, had found these man-like footprints. Now, looking back, they weren't very good footprints, to be honest with you. They were human-shaped, but there wasn't a lot of definition in terms of what we consider to be really convincing. So,
And were these from North America, or were they from down there in Belize?
These were in Belize.
They were in Belize.
In the Maya Mountains, at a place called El Prevesian Creek. And yeah, and now this is a spot that's pretty remote. There aren't a lot of people that go to this area, and certainly not a lot of people that would walk around barefoot in this area, because you're talking about, you've got one of the most venomous snakes in the Americas, the fertile ants crawling around. You've got scorpions and tarantulas and stuff. So, but that was pretty exciting because it kind of gave me a boost in the Bigfoot field, because, you know, whether the evidence was valid or not, I had taken the initiative to travel to another country, to a place where other researchers hadn't gone, and, you know, try to look for evidence of Bigfoot, you know, kind of down there. So that, you know, but there are so many amazing opportunities that I've had, Stephen. It's really hard to choose what my favorite is. You know?
And you were in France at some point.
Yeah.
What were you in France for? Drinking wine and cheese, or what?
I ate a lot of cheese, I won't lie. Drank a lot of wine. In 2008, 2009, I filmed a special for the History Channel called The Real Wolf Man.
The real Wolfman. That's why that makes sense.
And it was
France.
investigating a creature known as the Beast of Gévaudan, which is basically like a werewolf type creature that allegedly attacked and killed dozens of people in the late 18th century down in southern France. And so we basically went back and revisited this story of this creature that, and there's a whole long history behind this creature that attacked all these people. And supposedly an animal was shot and, buried somewhere that may have been a beast of Gévaudan.
That's so French.
Yeah, but people think of France and obviously Paris and all that. But if you get down to southern France, it's it's kind of rural areas, small mountains and hills and lots of livestock, sheep and cattle and stuff. So it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed my French excursion, and to this day, I still have a lot of people that have seen that particular episode on the History Channel. They show it every once in a while, and they really, enjoy it. So
I'm going to have to check that out. Now, Mitch, what do you think about that?
About France?
What do you think about France? And what say that? What is it again? The Beast of
Gévaudan.
I'm just like, we had a guest, or there was a visitor in the studio last week, and he was asking one of our tech people here, and he just the tech person said, "So do you believe in Bigfoot?" And he had the perfect answer. He said, "I have no reason not to," and I thought that was really good. And I thanked him for that comment because, why not? And it's interesting, and this ebb and flow of interest. I have a theory based on experiences. My parents, my grandparents, it's not that they wouldn't have been followers of Bigfoot. Doesn't mean they wouldn't have been doing the same thing. They were too busy working and paying the bills. We, as a society, it just is the fact. If my dad was alive today, he'd go, sure, why not? But he didn't have the time, the luxury of this going on. And I agree with, I believe it was Stephen, you said about the older the story. That's true, because it used to be quite expensive to produce a book and all this. And so if something actually made it to being published, it was really vetted a lot. Now it's just not as expensive.
And they seem to make more sense. They were more believable. Most of them that I read.
Well, because money wasn't the main driving force like it is today for a lot of people.
Like Ruby Creek, with that Ruby Creek.
The Ruby Creek incident, yeah.
Man, I was visualizing that last night. And I was like, that was scary. But then I read some more about that and whatnot. That was quite credible. Well, we've got a lot more to cover still here, so I want to get off the Bigfoot thing for a little bit, but I had to get over that. But tell me about this picture. Where is that?
That is 7,000 feet up on Trekuni Peak in the Garibaldi Range of British Columbia, just north of Squamish.
And what were you doing up there, son?
I was investigating. There's a famous video that was shot in 2012 right below me in the valley, right behind my right shoulder there. There was an alleged Sasquatch that was filmed by two biologists. They were up on the mountain, and they saw this lone figure walking through the snow in this valley, and they thought it was a Sasquatch. Ironically, they didn't have binoculars with them, so all they had was a kind of a low-grade video camera, but they said, according to them, this thing was walking upright. It looked like it was covered in hair. It was black. They couldn't see any gear, any hiking gear, anything. And so this thing was walking through the valley. So this particular video has been posted on YouTube, and it's gotten over 1 million
views.
Wait a minute.
Is that I think I saw that.
Squamish Sasquatch.
It was just kind of like going up. It looks like just pure snowy hill.
It's an upright blob that's kind of going up and down like this. So in 2014, I went out there and with some other investigators, and we went up to the spot where they'd filmed this thing, and we did a recreation. We set a guy down in the valley and had him walk the same path and trajectory to see, because one of their first claims was there's no way it was a human because this thing was moving too fast. So we wanted to challenge that and say, can a human walk that distance at that speed? And yes, he could. And actually, from where we were up on that vantage point, we could tell it was a man. We could tell it was upright. So anyways, we did a recreation, and I got to interview the two gentlemen who had videotaped this thing. One guy was named Miles Lamont. And again, these guys they're young guys, but they're biologists, and they're kind of adventurous. They grew up in BC, and so they've climbed and done all those things. So it's still controversial, Stephen. But we had the video analyzed by a couple of experts, and they both speculated that it might have in fact been a black bear and an optical illusion, because the bear was kind of climbing up a steep grade, and it looked like a man walking upright, because it's pretty far away. But these two guys are, they refuted that, and they said there's no way this thing was a bear. We've seen bears. Yeah. We live in BC, and so anyways, that's the shot.
That's one of the things that we do, is if we get something on video and we can't tell what it is, whether it be FLIR or just in daylight or whatever, and it's moving or whatever, we recreate it with to see if we can duplicate it,
sure.
The movement, the height, and all of that, and you got to do it. You got to do it, or you don't really know what you're looking at to a degree. If say, well, no, it can't be a person. Well, actually, it could be a person.
Yeah.
And so that we try to do that with everything before we put it out there.
Well, good for you. That's science.
And
science is about testing theories and challenging them.
I'm a citizen scientist.
You are. Absolutely what you're describing.
Awesome.
So I encourage that throughout the Bigfoot field. More people should try that.
That's a great photo, and I just I always try to grab a photo from one of the guests and say, okay, where is that really does you justice, and that one does. Well, let's get into your new book a little bit. The Essential Guide to the Loch Ness Monster and Other Aquatic Cryptids. Mm-hmm. Man, you cover a lot in this book. This was good, but you've got a real passion for these aquatic cryptids, I think.
Yeah, no doubt.
From reading the book, and there was a lot of them in there to cover. And the thing that was most striking to me, and like I said, I don't pay a lot of attention to this stuff, was concerning the Loch Ness Monster. You've got recent alleged photos of it. I mean, like, what was the most recent one you had in here? I think this gal from 2000 and...
Charlotte Robinson, the young girl?
Yeah, I didn't know that. I honestly had no idea that people were still getting, getting photos of what they believe to be the Loch Ness Monster out there.
Yeah, most people think of the Loch Ness Monster, and of course, the most sightings and alleged photographs occurred back in the 1930s.
Yeah, that's all I think about.
And then in the 1970s, 60s and 70s, there was Nessie was in the news a lot because there were different expeditions and things being launched. But sightings of the Loch Ness Monster have continued on a regular clip since that time. They average about 10 a year, 10 good ones.
Really?
Yeah.
I was totally unaware of that.
There are some dedicated Nessie investigators. In fact, the gentleman that wrote the foreword to my book, Steve Feltham, he's been camped along Loch Ness for 30 years in a little research van, and he's spent every
30
day,
years?
30 straight years he's been there with a telescope and cameras and just hoping to get evidence. So there are guys like that have been on the case in recent decades, guys like Steve, and they get sightings, and every couple years usually a controversial photograph will turn up that nothing really jaw-dropping, but things that are intriguing. So it is an ongoing mystery.
What has anybody? Because I was going through this. It was pretty late. Has anybody come up with any real physical evidence outside of photographs? Have there been any scales or bins or shredded anything?
No, unfortunately not. Nothing that's been very credible. I mean, there have been. I think there's at least one claim that things have been found, physical evidence, remains, and different things. But they're usually like old, vague stories that nobody can find the source to. So, in that respect, I think Bigfoot has a big advantage over the Loch Ness Monster and other aquatic cryptids because we have at least the trace evidence of the footprints. There are some alleged hairs and scat samples and things, but with regard to the Loch Ness Monster, now that's specifically geared to Nessie. Yeah. But for example, you have other similar monsters around the world that are less known, and one is known as Cadborosaurus, which has been sighted kind of in the Cadboro Bay and Georgia Strait and some of those places up in BC. In 1937, a carcass was found up there, and I write about it in the book.
Okay, I got to bring. What did you call that again?
Cadborosaurus.
Cadborosaurus.
Or caddy.
A caddy. Okay, and that was
C-A-D-D-Y.
where in BC?
Cadborough Bay is where a lot of the sightings have been, but it's been sighted allegedly in the in all of the inlets. I'm trying to think that George's Strait.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is significant. As you know, I spent a good portion of my formative years up on the coast of BC.
Yeah.
And not only did we have the Sasquatch, that we had to deal with up there, but I never knew what the name of that creature was. My dad claims that he had seen this thing.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, and it was like it was interesting because when we moved back up there, basically my dad moved up there because he could be with all of his buddies again, right? And so there's all these guys like Billy Proctor, who's got the museum, he's an author and all that down at the Echo Bay Resort, and there Walt Rudd, and just all these names I can throw out, right? And my dad, this is the guys that he grew up with out there in the shit, and they all would sit around and drink and tell stories about this stuff, but they all had seen this thing at varying times out there, and it was just like Sasquatch. Yeah, they're out there, just don't mess with, whatever. You see them, don't worry about them, or whatever. But I called when he was talking about the sea monster thing, and then here we are talking about it. So there's credibility beyond liquor talking.
Yeah, there is sightings to go back to, I believe, the 1920s or 30s. In and around, Victoria and some of those places where people have collected these. A lot of boaters but the interesting story goes back to 1937 and a place called Queen Charlotte Island, which is a little island up there where they have this whaling station. And allegedly in 1937, these whale flensers, the guy that cut open the sperm whales and get them ready for market. Cut the blubber out and stuff. They found this snake-like animal in the stomach of a sperm whale. It was about 14 feet long, and none of them had ever seen anything like it before. So the guy who was in charge at that time, a guy named Hubbard, had them set this carcass up on a row of boxes with a white sheet, for contrast, and he took pictures of it. And nobody knows. This is kind of like a recurring thing in the field of cryptozoology, but sadly the remains have mysteriously vanished. No one knows what happened to this thing. But it looks like a sea monster or sea serpent, if you know the old terminology. And
what my father described that he saw was, it was this long, kind of like what you got in the book.
Snake-like.
But like 60, 70 feet long, and it would just it would go like that. And they would see it in Wells Passage and sometimes out of Queen Charlotte Strait. And I was like, here we are in Drury Inlet, and I'm like, always out there in my little sailboat there, and I'm like, I don't want that. Don't tell me any stories like that. I don't want that thing coming up here. And then it was down there around Greenway Sound. But it was seen frequently, and it's like, oh yeah, that's out there.
Yeah, well, you hit on an important point there, Stephen, which is the fact that, the physical descriptions of the Loch Ness Monster, Cadborough, and others, they always say that it's moving up and down in vertically undulating motions. Well, that is a uniquely mammalian characteristic. Aquatic mammals, otters, seals, they always go up and down. That's how they deflection, whereas reptiles and fish swim side to side, right, horizontally. So that is one of the theories that I explore in my new book. Is that the Loch Ness Monster and some of these other sea monsters are actually mammals. They're not reptiles or fish.
Right. Wow, man, I got to spend some more time researching.
Unknown mammals, obviously, because we don't have anything in the fossil record that matches this exactly.
Yeah.
So.
Well, okay, Dad, I believe you now. Anyways.
That's cool. It's a small world, isn't it?
Well, we're getting short on time here, unfortunately. At this point, is there anything else significant that you would like to say about the book there? Loch Ness monsters are.
Well, one of the things that's kind of gotten a lot of attention is, and just like my Bigfoot book, Stephen, I try to present the most accurate and objective information to the reader, and I'd like them to form their own opinion based on their own critical thinking or whatever. So I don't push a lot of theories real hard, but in the Nessie book, I do mention a theory that if it exists, the Loch Ness Monster and some of these other aquatic cryptids around the world, which I think are all the same species because the physical descriptions match all over the globe, that these could potentially be descended from an ancient line of prehistoric whales prehistoric serpentine whales that a lot of people don't know about called archaeocetes or basilosaurs. And early on in whale evolution, during the Miocene, or actually going back to maybe the Oligocene, like 40 million years ago, there was a branch of early whales that had a very long, incredibly long, thin body compared to modern whales that we think of. And, they most likely they did vertically undulate up and down. And supposedly they went extinct, 25 million years ago during the Miocene. But really, based on the physical descriptions of Nessie and other lake monsters, they really kind of match the modern descriptions better than any other animal that I think you could think of. So
there's so much stuff. When I was reading that, I was thinking about it. I'm a diver, and I used to do a lot of diving off of Port Hardy and Nanaimo and stuff. And I remember the first time I encountered a wolf eel. And whatnot, and it scared the hell out of me.
They're weird looking.
They are extremely weird looking, and I was
animals.
thinking about that experience last night.
No doubt.
But hoping to get up there. But when you know that there might be something like that out there besides sharks and the orcas and things like that swimming around, it kind of things get a little bit eerie. But I still hear that Jaws soundtrack every time I go diving up there. I'll never get rid of it. I wish they never would have made that movie. It's a killer if you're going to be a diver. But
I have a hard rule about going into the ocean or any large body of water, Stephen, which is why introduce myself into the food chain? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I don't do a lot of swimming or diving or anything like that. So
the last time I was up diving up off of Port Hardy, we were at this place called 5 Fathom Rock, and it's out there a bit. Beautiful dive. Anyways, had a great time. And then we come back in, and then we were up there for about a week doing various other dives. And then I get back here, and I'm reading a dive magazine, and then I find that week that we were up there, they caught a 28-foot great white shark in a net just out the tip, right up, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 miles away from where we were at. And I was like, oh no, I tell my buddies, don't worry about it, man, there's no sharks around, don't worry about it. It changed things a little bit, but.
That is Jaws, right?
Yeah, I mean, dude,
the movie says Dreyfus says that's a 20-footer, and then Robert Shaw goes 25. So it's like that's a Jaws.
Hey, you can do a great impression of that guy, Captain Quid. But, anyways, well, we're about out of time. Please tell people how they can get a copy of your books.
Well, thanks again for having me on, guys. I really appreciate this. Had a great time. My books are all available on Amazon.com. People can just look for Ken Gerhard, and I have an author page with all of my books listed. I also sell signed copies of my books directly, and people can contact me on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. I'm out there in a lot of places. If they'd like a signed copy, I do those directly as well. So
Okay, great. Yeah, because I would encourage you to get a copy of both of these. But
more than just both of them, I'd say. Now I know what I'm going to do. It's between now and June, I'm going to read all of his books, and then since he'll be there, then it'll give me the opportunity to ask him questions, and then get him to sign my books. Then,
but
nice.
Definitely, based on his description of these books, I haven't read them. No, I really want to. I'm gonna order them and read them because just his approach to it's very interesting.
Yeah, and let's not forget that Ken's going to be at the Medellin Falls Bigfoot Festival.
Yes,
and
looking
have
forward
a
to
ton
that.
of books.
Should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, thanks again for being on the show. We're out of time, and ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ken Gerhard. Well, welcome back, my friends. And hey, we just had a couple of good dudes in the audience that I wanted to pull up here to speak with us about how the interview went with Ken Gerhard. We have Brent and Dawn from the Paranormal Portal who came in today to visit us. What do you guys think of that show?
Oh, it was fantastic. Phenomenal. I've been following Ken's work for a long time, so it was really cool to have the opportunity to sit back not only and listen to Ken, but to talk with him, and it was just fascinating. And the show literally could have been hours long and absolutely compelling.
Right.
It was great.
Well, and it's great listening to the new book, The Essential Guide to Loch, Nessie, because there's a lot of things that I never knew about. Like he talked about, the mammalian, the way they move and things like that. And it's, you think about it, whales have a horizontal fin and fish have a vertical fin. And so it's interesting to think of it that way because I've never thought about the way things swim. Yeah. And so, bringing that up and then, the correlations between the different ones, like your dad's encounter and the correlation between that was really cool to see that connection come together for you. So I thought it was great.
Yeah, very educational. I'm still partial to Bigfoot, but now I'm, now since I have, the story that my dad had
Right.
told us, and then to see this in this book, I'm going to pay a little more attention to that since we're up there a lot anyways, you know. What do you think, Mitch?
I think the first comment was totally spot on. The show could have gone on for hours, and it would have been very interesting. I could have totally. So, never to miss an opportunity to beat a dead horse. One more reason to go to Medellin Falls because Mr. Gerhardt's going to be there, and people will be asking, and you just have to stand back and listen. You won't be bored. You will not be bored for sure. So it's a good reason to go.
Yeah. Oh, well, tell the folks what you guys are going to be doing at the Medellin Falls.
Oh gosh, what are we going to be doing?
We're going to be juggling and.
Well, we're going to be talking.
You guys going to juggle?
Actually, we're going to be talking to Bob, and we're going to be talking to Ken, and there's just icons going to be there.
Yeah, we're
And
going to be.
We're just going to be like starstruck.
We'll be in the corner drooling. What are we doing here?
Too much information.
It's a phenomenal event. We are absolutely thrilled to be able to be a part of it in whatever capacity we can be. We're going to be there in front and center and mixing it up with everybody and just having. I mean, it's like a bucket list in one location for me. So this is going to be an incredible event. I hope all of you guys out there, if you haven't already made plans, make plans. This is an event you're not going to want to miss.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, it is going to be a festival. I mean, I'm telling you. And that term was kind of like, the festival, Bigfoot. No, it is. I mean, the enthusiasm for this, we're going to have a lot of maniacs
It's
there.
going to be like Woodstock without
Woodstock.
drugs.
Yeah, it's going to be like Woodstock.
Without
without-
drugs. Yeah. In
It's
Washington
Woodstock.
State, pot's legal, so that part will emulate Woodstock. But yeah,
Well, great, guys. Thanks for coming in to visit us today. And we're going to wrap things up now. And once again, my friends, be well, be kind to one another, and we'll see you next week.
There's a fable of a beast that once roamed this land. Some say still exists as a big tall ape man, standing over 8 feet tall, quite a sight to see. Living in the forest, he's quite a mystery. Bigfoot, Bigfoot, roaming through the land. Bigfoot, Bigfoot, a hairy ape-like man.